workshop going. We're going to talk about garden design.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcus. And
it's kind of true in a way, and you can move through that stage. So that there's this learning and growth, and I suppose sometimes my philosophy has been, if it dies, well, it just wasn't meant to be, and then you stick with the plants that survived, and eventually you'll find things that actually just do so well, it gets easier as you eliminate the stuff that just doesn't work. Long term, so thinking long term, and it goes along with that everything dies thing. And I think learning to garden really is experimenting, and just don't let yourself suddenly stop. Just keep trying things, keep going, and you'll gain those skills over time.
and take notes. I think that's a big thing, is like taking the time to be documenting what you're doing is really important. Otherwise, it'll come the second year and you'll make the mistake again, and you'll start feeling really defeated by it, when you can really learn a lot from that and make the changes. And when you do make those changes based off your own observations, it can be really empowering. I think note taking is one of the hardest things that farmers or gardeners leave out, because they just want to work hard until the moment they're done their day. But it's also important just to be documenting and taking time to be reflecting and observing what is actually happening on what day and stuff.
There's so much that we could talk about, but we really are going to focus on the design aspects today. So we've got 4 kind of main areas. Firstly, where do we want to put a garden on a property, or where are suitable planting spaces? Then which plants go in those planting spaces, so what goes where. Talking about composting, fertility, and water, designing for those things in mind. And then a little bit about just construction and different ways that you could build things. So that's going to be the focus. And Marcus said we do have other workshops coming up. We've got one for planting. Talking about designing and just looking at your space. And everybody has different spaces. You have from 12 acres to a quarter acres to this, and probably even smaller. You could have a balcony, whatever, whenever you're designing. And one of the first things I like to ask people is, how do you use your space right now? Like, where are you on your property? Where do you go? Where do you move? Because if we design our gardens around where we are, where we habitually move, it means that we're going to be more in touch with our gardens, or that we have that understanding. A lot of people will build their, like, a vegetable garden way at the back, they never go there. They get into their lives, and the garden just kind of is done. It just doesn't get tended to. So in permaculture, there's this concept called zones, and they divide them up into 5 zones. Zone 1 is the area that, well, there's a little bit of differences, but zone 1 is basically the places where you go all the time. So where do you think, like on your property, where are you most of the time? You go in and out of your front door how many times every day? And if you drive, how many times do you walk from your front door to your car? So that's what I mean by zone 1. It's like you're always, that's just your routine. You're always there. You might not notice. You might not even think of that as part of your property or a place where you could have plants. But that's zone 1. And then your zone 2 is something that's a little bit more removed. So people who have compost or chickens, you have to go out there once a day, or the garbage, whatever you're doing. It's just those spaces that you normally use quite a bit of time. So if you expand your thought about your property into that, what do you see? Zone 3 are, in terms of gardening, they're a little bit further away, but still places that you access and use regularly. So in a zone 3 zone, you might have like your main vegetable garden that you tend to, even if it's something weekly, that you go there, you work on your crops, you do a bunch of weeding, and then the rest of the time you're not necessarily there all the time. And some crops are better suited to that than others. And zone 4 is seasonally or infrequently. So if you have a little orchard, you're not in your orchard all the time. You go there to pick your fruit or do your pruning, right? So they're sometimes used. And then zone 5 is wild spaces, pretty much, or spaces that you're not intending to cultivate particularly, but they might be habitat for wild creatures or bees or lizards or snakes or things like that. Mind is that really loves the shade, especially in the summer, and that is something you also use really, really often is salad greens or lettuces.
Really?
Yeah, because they hate the sun. The sun and the hot weather, salad
That's
greens do
why.
not like that at all. So if you had a shadier spot by your front door, what about putting some pots of like little mesclun mixed greens, and then every time you're walking in, you're like, oh, I guess I could cut a few leaves and we'll have salad. Whereas, if they were way back there in zone 3, we might just not have bothered.
That somebody says, I want a garden, I don't got tons of time, let's say, or tons of space, let's say even, applying these and taking the time to think about where you're going, and then just simply making your garden be in those areas. So if you're walking back to the compost in the back corner, and this year you want to put lettuce, maybe you want to plant little beds, and then there's a pathway, and it's just right next to it, right there, and so that you're observing it more and you're around it.
And some people, they'll have a lawn like this, but they always do. They just make this direct thing because maybe their compost is over there. You can build that into a pathway, and like you say, put things on either side of it, and then have this pathways that go off. And as you expand, it's kind of like this spider web design where everything is connected. And it's actually those human spaces that are the most important in your design. When you're thinking about where's my garden bed, first you want to think about, well, where am I? And where does it make sense? Where is it easy for me to access the garden bed? So we did the shade plants. What if you have a really hot zone 1, like right at your front door? It's super hot and sunny.
Mediterranean herbs.
Yeah, sure.
Oregano, rosemary, tomatoes.
Tomatoes, yeah, that's one came to my mind. Cherry tomatoes, and especially if you have kids, and then they're just like, they walk out their door and they're eating cherry tomatoes all the time. They're gonna be full, and there's gonna be like no chips or that. They're full of tomatoes.
And thinking about things that need to be regularly harvested is also when you want to think about planting in that zone 1 and 2. You might have already seen or already be doing this at your home, but a lot of times if you look at whatever the south-facing part of your home is, that's a microclimate too because of the heat that's coming off of it, right? So you see a lot of people plant their fruit trees, they're very sun-loving fruit trees, up against the south-facing wall of their home. And there's been people back in Quebec when I lived there who were growing things that were completely impossible just because they had really a huge amount of sunlight on brick, and they were able to, and they would extend the season because the nights when the frost would be happening everywhere else, the heat from the wall would be emanating onto the plants, and so they were actually getting 2 to 3 weeks longer seasons, which would allow them to get fruits that they wouldn't be able to get if it was out in the middle of a 1-acre field or something. So it's pretty fascinating how actually like the urban infrastructures of the city and buildings can actually be beneficial to create new ways of growing and growing outside of the norms of a certain ecosystem.
Like you said, the fruit trees, they do a lot better. There's some plants that won't do well at all if they're just in the normal place. They need those microclimates. And one that comes to mind is rosemary. So a lot of people have trouble growing rosemary, and partly in this climate, it likes drier, really well-drained soil. So if you put it out in the middle of your garden or like a pretty kind of wet spot, it won't do as well. So sometimes you think, oh, I just can't grow that, or I'm a bad gardener. It's just that the plant needs to be in a different place. And so there's tons of info about it. Okay, just in terms of, again, when we're looking at zones and it ties into microclimates, other factors, like what other factors can you think of that would affect their sun and shade?
Deer.
Microclimate. Deer, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So there's going to be some spaces in your garden that you'll be able to fence for deer, and some spaces that would really just be very hard to do that with.
Wind is another one that's really important, depending on where you are, is to think about where it's coming from and to observe. A lot of people talk about when getting serious into wanting to landscape and create a farm or a serious garden, and where you're going to invest your time and money into it, to actually sit the year before and just work on the design and planning of it. Maybe if you were going to till, do that, or if you're going to mulch, do that. So in your first year, you're looking at what happens during the season. How much sun are you getting? How much sun is being blocked on the shoulder seasons from those trees that seem far away?
And so along with wind, a very similar effect is noise or views, right? So you have a neighbor, and you just kind of want to block that out, right? So that's another, you could put a hedgerow. But also I want to, just before we start to move around, talk about the multifunction elements. So you think about all these things that you want. You want a chicken coop and a greenhouse and a compost, or a trellis for your kiwis. How do you integrate those elements so that they perform more than one function? So that neighbor that you don't want to look at, or the noise, you build a trellis and you grow a plant over it, right? Or you have your greenhouse or your tool shed and you just create a little awning over the back of it, which is where your compost goes. So your tools, your compost, everything is performing multiple functions. And they're in one zone, perhaps, right? So you don't have to go cavorting all over your property, taking a lot of time to do things. You go to one place and things are... So some of those adaptations might be having cold frames, or so if you have a garden bed, and you have like some plastic or row cup or something, you can put over it at night. So that would help to minimize the shift in temperature for those plants. Another thing that comes to mind is where the plants are. So you get those really hot sunny days, everything heats up and then it cools down.
Cools down amazingly.
Suddenly it's cold. But if you had plants like right in the middle of this terrace, they're going to stay warmer a lot longer because of the heat sink effect, right? Or the same thing if you had a hedge or some kind of a windbreak. So here in the Alberni Valley, the wind comes up quite often in the afternoon. So if you put that windbreak up, it'll just, you have to create microclimates to sort of mitigate those shifts. And yeah, every plant will be different.
Fabric-y cloth kind of stuff, it's woven and it can go over, but you can also do plastic, and you just go and you get simple little either PVC pipe or just these wires, and you can buy them from most of the major farming supply places, and you just kind of put it over top of your bed if you've got straight beds. There's other ways that we can be going about it, and then just lay this cloth over top and pin it down with some bags, and that can really increase the temperature by 4 or 5 degrees and can keep frost off the plants in those early points, you know. So I kind of just want you to move around the front and the backyard.
maybe 10 minutes or so, and look at all the spaces. Think about where the zones are. Think about the spaces that could be used for planting, and what sort of elements you could put in, or how you could mix things up.
Take some clippings from my grapes at home, which are amazing, my other home. I want raspberries, strawberries, rhubarb, some juniper, and lavender. So those would be my things.
Well, for you to
Well, I want to hear the ideas that we come up with for her project.
And then I guess in terms of incorporating like food plants into that, the simplest thing is to, you know, start with what you have. If you have a very beautiful ornamental garden, you can put plants in there kind of anywhere randomly. Just mix up your vegetables in with your flowers.
What about some more herbs, like your
Herbs,
flowering
and
and
herbs, yeah, absolutely.
for cooking and things like that?
Yep.
You could make it, yeah, you could do the herb bed just from where you come from the car into the house.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So there's a mark there. So this is uphill, obviously, right? So you want to find so that's pretty much level from here to here. And what I would do is I would place, say, a rock here and a rock there, and then just swivel this. And does it go up here? Does it go down here? So this is how you make some really beautiful curved paths where you find the contour.
So you stay level.
So you're staying level. And so then I would have a rock there and a rock there, and now a rock here, and I'd flip it around. And you see I'm actually coming up now a little bit. Well, maybe not. Right? So you're pretty straight. You could have a straight garden here really easily. But in some places, like right here, you'll actually end up with a curved garden to be on contour. And the other thing is that those curves are actually aesthetically really pleasing as well. They like it, and in fact, it's almost would match this the patio here.
One of the things I'm always thinking about is if you're going to be coming out and you're going to be trying to do most of your stuff with hand watering, say your garden's small, is to ask where that hose is going to be dragging and what it's going to be dragging across. Because too often I've seen these spots where I actually want my hose to go over by the tree, but there's all these beds in this way. There's stuff over here, and when I'm not paying attention, I carry it, and my poor seedlings get crushed. One trick to that is to be designing your garden in this way. If you're just going to keep it there and you don't want to invest in more water-related things, maybe I'm going to run a straight path straight down here that's going to allow me to uncoil my hose and get it down here. Then, if the beds are running on contour, what I'll do is I'll actually pound a wood stake about this high right at the front of each path, so that when I come here, I would just say, okay, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to make a path that comes straight through here, and then as my pathways are going this way, because I have beds, at each one I would put this in the ground so that when I'm coming out with my hose, I would go around and then walk down the pathway without crushing stuff. So this is something to really think about. And then whether or not you want to have your paths being straight, your beds being straight, or if you're interested in more curves, things along these lines, will also inform which kind of irrigation you're going to be using, because it's important in the summertime. This is just a very simple and very cheap irrigation system that I got from Irritex in between Parksville and Coombs. These things were only like $7 or $10 each, and I put them on a stake. And what I like about them is they're up higher, and they're circular. They just come out and it just slowly moves, and it covers a pretty big amount of space. Probably 2 of these could cover that whole half of the yard. And so this is good. This is top-down irrigation, so it is wasting water, especially on windy days. And I use it just when I plant my first seeds. So when I sow my first seeds, I'll use this for the first week to 2 weeks to be watering. And the reason why I like it to be high is because a lot of the other ones that are really low to the ground, when they're either going doing that, impact sprayers, or even the back and forth watering, right? It's hitting plants that are low to the ground. So then you end up having to find spaces to put it where it's not going to come and spray right against the plant that's right next to it. With these, why I like them is I can plop it right down in the middle of wherever my garden is, and it's from above moving. So this is just one system to think about that is really useful. And I like these because you can actually take it apart at all these points. They're very simple. You can rebuild it very easily. But yeah, very cheap way to have something set up. I do everything on timers, and I have the timer over here because when it comes to gardening and comes to farming, you want to always be trying to think about how you can minimize work that isn't directly bringing food into the house, right? Like I want to be harvesting and planting. I don't want to be weeding and watering all the time. And if I am going to be watering, I want to water in a way that's not wasting very much. So I choose a timer because I want the water to come on at 5 or 6 in the morning before the sun comes out. And I want it to water, and I want the water to seep into the ground at that time. I don't want the sun to be just baking it away, right? Because it's a waste. I also don't want to be getting up at 5:30 in the morning and watering every single day, right? So a timer, these are usually around $30, is really useful, and they even come with different zones. So you can plug in, one here and one here, depending on if you've got an area that wants a lot of water or doesn't want a lot of water. So I highly recommend timers. And this stuff's really incredible. I started using it last year. It's drip tape. I don't know how many of you know, but it's only going to really be useful on straight rows. And so what you do is it gets plugged into a whole system, but it basically attaches to this at the end, and they have like little emitters that plug in. And it runs just right down the length of your bed, and there's little teeny slits all along the tape that are just dripping out water very slowly. And I'll put 3 of them down. I have 3-foot wide beds approximately. That's just that's the way, because I measure how far I can reach into something without it feeling uncomfortable, and then I times it by 2 for when I'm on the other side. And I'm like, 3 feet, that's good for me. That's how much I can reach where I'm not overexerting myself. And then I think about, I'll put 3 of these lines down, and I just researched to find out that how much water they'll cover. And these save a lot of water. And they also put water where you want it, deep into the ground, because they just keep dripping and pushing it down. It was the best gardening I ever had last year, was with using this stuff. So
are they buried? No.
Nope, they're not buried. They're right on the surface. And I have it. These are 8-inch spacings, where the little emitters, they're just like these little cuts in it that just drip out. If you can get 6-inch, I think it's better personally, and from what I've researched, I find that to be the case. But so these are just a couple different options. You'll also see stuff called soaker hose, and that stuff you can curl around stuff a little bit better. I find it to be a really junky product. The thing with soaker hose, as soon as you rip it, you're done. Whereas with this, and I did rip it, if you do happen to cut into it and it starts dripping, you just take a pair of scissors and cut at the spot, and just come back to your old stuff, cut a piece like this, and it actually slides over both ends, and you can reconnect it, and you're good to go again. So you can fix it real fast for nothing.
Every yard should have a big pile of leaves in a corner somewhere, and you just pile them there, and then in the summer when you need the mulch, you just come in and use that. Leaves are one of the best. Any organic matter, just start collecting it. And it's interesting, once you finish off that pile of leaves, look at the soil under where those leaves were sitting. It's teeming with life. That's what you want in your garden, right? So you put the leaves on your garden, and that happens in your soil there.
I actually use cardboard.
Cardboard is a great mulch. Yeah, and so in paths, cardboard everywhere. You could even cut cardboard out around plants and put it into plants. Grass clippings work well. I personally usually just say just leave the grass clippings on the grass and mulch them in. It's good for your grass that way. And then talking about getting into fertility, there's a lot of plants that you can grow to become mulch. And that is a really good way. So let's talk about fertility. So I'll talk about the plants because we're here right now. There's some plants that are they call them dynamic accumulators. Basically, they're plants that really have a strong tendency to pull out nutrients from the soil. Specific nutrients. Some plants, they pull up calcium. Some plants pull up potassium. They tend to be kind of deep-rooted, so they also penetrate into the soil. So these plants kind of harness all these nutrients in the soil. They bring them up into their leaves, and then you cut the leaves down, and you can use them as mulch. So basically, what you're growing is your compost, or you're growing your mulch. Kind of compost plants are called nitrogen-fixing plants, and those nitrogen is the nutrient that it kind of helps to create the lush greenness in plants and lots of quick growth. So some plants have nitrogen fixing bacteria on their roots, and they specifically attach and bring nitrogen into those plants. So they're called green manures.